Hello, hello, and welcome to Limitless Talks. This is a podcast on limitless leadership and how experience become a growth lever in the boardroom. I'm your host, Camila Ferreira, an award-winning CX leader, an author of Long Live CX, and an international speaker. Today's topic is decoding consumer behavior, how machine learning can turn patterns into profitable decisions. And to have this conversation with me, I have here Joel Menéndez, who is a trailblazer in data analytics and who now acts as an independent consultant, helping companies to better predict growth through data. So welcome to the show, Joel. Please take this online stage and introduce yourself and let people know how you transform experience into business growth.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joel Menéndez. I used to work with Cami a few years ago. and I've worked in mostly tech for the past 7 or 8 years in companies like Uber, DiDi, and Airbnb. And what I typically did there was lead operations teams, but I usually led them through making decisions with data science. And so I realized that this is something that a lot of companies struggle with. And so I just started my own thing, helping any and everyone who lacks this knowledge to make better decisions for their businesses. And I think that's a good short summary for the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And that's very much true. So Joel and I, we shared strategies and lots of discussions about data when the two of us were working for Uber Eats during the pandemic. So you can imagine how challenging it was growing 3 digits on a monthly basis and trying to push and educate the organization to make decisions around data. It was a very interesting moment, I believe, for the two of us. And before we jump into this conversation, I want to invite you all who is watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Instagram to make questions, to make comments. I would love to bring you to these live conversations with Joel that it will be about data. And I think that it's not more timely to have a conversation like this because more and more we are surrounded by data, but the fact that we have data doesn't mean that we have information. And this is such a great distinction that we need to make. Sometimes, and I have worked for companies that used to have a lot of data, but not necessarily making the best decisions out of that. And why? Because they did not have the information. So understanding data and using these for prediction and for business decisions is what differentiates the successful companies from the regular companies, I would say. And to start this conversation, Joel, I have come up with a few questions, but once again, I really want to invite the audience here. So just to kick things off, let's go. I have the first question for you here. So when leaders talk about consumer behavior, what are they still missing that machine learning can uncover more effectively, in your opinion?
I think that the one thing that machine learning helps people see better when talking about behavior is that a lot of people, a lot of managers, a lot of people in the industry that I've worked with typically think that consumer behavior is linear. So like, for example, we worked in online food delivery. So they think that, for example, if on average we deliver every 40 minutes, if we make it to 37 minutes, we would decrease, 3% churn or something like that, right? And for the most part, what I've seen is that it's typically very non-linear. It's threshold based, as I like to say. You typically have very consistent behavior in let's use this example of delivery, just to keep on the same topic. You would have people who, for example, anywhere between 0 and 35 minutes, churn does not increase or decrease. It just stays flat. And then after 35 minutes, it starts to go kind of haywire, not necessarily exponentially up, but it becomes very unpredictable. And so you know that if you want to control churn, you have to deliver sooner than 35 minutes. But if you're already at 35 and then you move to 30, odds are that you're going to spend a lot of money because optimizing the operation is costly in terms of man hours. You're going to have your team, which is, costly in terms of money and also man hours. These are very talented people being put to solve a problem that does not exist. It's not a problem. It's just some information that it's here. Now they want it there for some reason. And also in terms of the operation itself, if you need couriers to deliver faster, you may need to pay them more, you may need to acquire more, and all of this takes time and money. And because you'd assume that the behavior is linear, that like, well, it's 35, now it's 30, churn should magically go down, and or I should have a lot less, how do you call it, recalls from of the food. And odds are nothing very, how do you call it, significant is going to happen. You're going to have spent a lot of money and a lot of time that you could have used to do something else that actually brings value. So that's probably the biggest thing I've seen, is that human behavior is typically not linear. You typically are very patient or very happy or very sad up until a certain threshold. And after that threshold, you do need to take care of it, because after that, it can go haywire. But for the most part, you just need to be sure that you are between here and some number, as opposed to just keep bringing it down every single month just for the sake of doing so.
Oh, I love it. I love it because when I was listening to you, I literally remember conversations like, oh, how much churn can we reduce by either reducing or increasing 1% of this particular metric? And what you were saying is that it's not necessarily that way, right? And that's why analyzing data is so important, because otherwise we can catch ourselves in traps like this, kind of doing calculations of estimating the impact of a 1% variation up or down, when this will not necessarily happen, because the behavior do not change on a linear basis, but in threshold. So correct. I love it. I love it. And I think that this is so insightful for whoever is listening to us, not kind of falling in this trap of engaging in conversations like this when the data will not necessarily, or the high level data will not necessarily give you the answer that you were looking for. It's really important that you understand trends. And I do remember when you and I were at Uber Eats, kind of analyzing data and trying to kind of influence leadership that sometimes comes with a mindset, with a pre-concept that it's hard to break or it's hard to change. But that's the power of data. When you have against data, it's again, it's hard.
And we were talking about this a few minutes before we officially started the podcast, about definitions, right? So people will say, or people would think, if you decrease time, it's a better experience, because a lot of time they do not have a clear definition of what experience means. So these people are not ill-intentioned, of course. They do want to improve experience. They just never sat down and thought, how am I actually going to measure this so that I know that if I do X, I can actually see if experience goes up or down? In this particular example, my proposal was, and I told them, it's not perfect, but I'd rather have imperfect than nothing. It's increased or decreased probability of churn. If something increases the average probability of churn, that's probably a bad experience. And if it doesn't, then if it goes down, then it's probably a good experience. If nothing happens, it probably does not affect at all. And this was the case with this one. It's not that it gets better or worse. It's just indifferent up until a certain point where the user starts, looking at their watch, because and you have to also take into account the, how do you call it? You cannot just, the data is there, but you have to also kind of match it with what's going on with more qualitative insights. Like, for example, what's a half an hour these days with an iPhone and Netflix? Nothing. You can probably assume that they're watching TV, and unless it takes a lot of time, it's like maybe it's an hour, because there'll be like, it's already 3 episodes. What's going on here? But if it's 1 episode, or they're scrolling through Instagram, it makes a lot of sense once you actually look into it intuitively, as well as with the data, why this could be the case.
Oh, absolutely. We are getting some questions here from the audience, but before I bring this to our online stage, I love this topic. And yes, that we were discussing just before going live, which is having a clear understanding of what you are trying to solve. Exactly. And I am constantly going on stage and helping leaders in different organizations do exactly this. I think that we are living in this era of artificial intelligence, and some leaders are just going after artificial intelligence to check a box, but not necessarily solve the problem. So we're starting with a very clear and structured problem statement where you have a clear understanding of what is in front of you, of what you were trying to achieve. And moreover, as you correctly said, how you translate this into metrics. Because when we talk about experience, which is my area of expertise, so experience, it can be so many things for different people. What does experience mean to you, or what does experience mean to the organization you are looking for? It's really important that you understand what is the moment of the organization. So for example, when you and I were at Uber Eats, growth was not a thing. It was actually profitability.
Yes.
Because the company was growing organically. Everybody was locked at home and ordering things online. It was not a problem of bringing in new customers or new suppliers.
Also, interest rates were up. So you have to make your own money. I'm sorry. You have to make your own money.
So
it's not really asking for a loan anymore. So
absolutely. So understanding what you are trying to achieve and how it translates into, I would say, quantitative metrics. And I like that you brought the qualitative perspective here, because the other thing I always say is that the quantitative metric does not say it all. It's really important that you kind of you start your analysis with the quantitative data to understand, for example, is this kind of a linear progression, yes or no? So how does the data behave? That's the first point. That's the first step. And then after that, what is the qualitative data that I also have here to complement this analysis?
Correct.
So it's the combination of those two things that is going to make your point way more robust when you go to the boardroom to make your points, to present your idea. It's not about kind of talking about sentiments like I see many CX leaders doing. Oh, the satisfaction went up and down. Okay, fantastic. So what it means for the company, what it means financially, is it worth investing more kind of resources and systems and whatever it takes to actually improve that metric, yes or no? And that's when the data comes into place for us to understand what is the trend. So I love this, and I am constantly talking about this, and I love that you brought this topic, because knowing what you are trying to solve, having a kind of a clear problem statement and translating this into a metric that is spoken in the boardroom is definitely the first step, in my opinion.
Yes, correct. Can I share my screen for a while, or does it not allow it? I did not ask this before.
Yeah, I have never done that before.
I prepared some slides just so people can have a visual of what I'm talking about. I think it's very...
Yes. Go ahead. At the bottom, you have a kind of a screen sharing button.
I think so. Let me just...
First time doing this here. Look at this.
Yes. Look. Okay. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, now we can see your screen.
Okay. So this is what I mean. A lot of people typically think that, and I'm using very delivery industry examples just because it's where I have the most experience. But you have delivery time, you have probability of churn. People would think, you're at this average, and if you go down, then probability of churn goes down. And actually, it kind of looks more like this. I invented these numbers, of course, but the behavior is real. You have a point in time where people don't really care, and then even if you deliver late, it's not necessarily that it takes a lot of time. If you order something that says it's going to take 70 minutes, people will wait. But people are a lot less patient if the wait time was long to begin with. But once you look at this problem, you realize that less than 1% of the observations actually fit here in the behavior that is concerning. And so, how do you call it? It's actually mostly a non-issue when you actually take a look at it with the numbers. And this is sort of like another way to see it. This is, for example, I did not put the x-axis, but these are also delivery times. And this is sort of a histogram of, how many, for every user, how many average orders they have with this amount of time. And you can see a histogram. It's normally distributed. People who order the most typically fall within the average time. People who order the least typically, because the more you order, the more you are closer to the mean, typically are on the tails. And what you can see is that churn rate is the lowest on people who were already ordering. It's not about the time. It's just some people get hooked for some reason that it's not related to time. And then people who were less hooked to begin with continue to be less hooked in the future. So it's sort of like a more visual way to see it, and something that I've used sometimes in meetings just to say, okay, here's the data, and also here is another proof that it's just people who order more continue to do so. People who order less maybe just do so because maybe they order once every 3 months or something.
Yeah, I know that in e-commerce, not only from my experience at Uber Eats, but also at Groupon, how those companies are so obsessed with delivery time. And this is so insightful because it kind of challenges a bias, a pre-concept that people that work in that industry come with. So I love it. Let's switch gears a little bit because we have Christy here asking a question that I believe it's very insightful for this conversation. So how are you using AI to identify and define those thresholds beyond which CX is significantly affected? Thank you, Christy, for the question.
You could use AI, but you could do it via machine learning. The AI is going to do a machine learning algorithm. That's what it's going to do. So, for example, the first thing I do, which we've just spoken about, is just define exactly, what it is you're trying to measure. Is it, ROI? Is it whatever? And then you could do one or two things, or you typically have to do both. You could run an algorithm, a classification algorithm to be more specific, and it will tell you within the branches, and I can show an image in a few moments after I finish talking, where you can see exactly beyond which threshold behavior changes, and then you can also graph it. So the graph that I just showed, if you could just plot the data, you can see if it kind of goes, they're going to look like little dots. They're not going to look like a straight line, of course. But if they do something like this and then it goes haywire, if they go in a straight line, if they stay within a circle, then you can see, for example, if it goes on a straight line, then it's a linear behavior. If they go on a straight line horizontally and then behavior suddenly changes above certain threshold, you can see, oh, that's the threshold that I need to worry about. And if it just looks like a shotgun, then it's just, there is absolutely no correlation at all, either threshold based or linear, with those data and what you're trying to actually measure.
Wow, amazing. Chrissy, thank you once again for raising the question. And there is another topic I want to discuss here, which is the monthly or the quarterly or the weekly, all the business reviews, right? So we've all been part of this at some point in time of our professional life. So first of all, the amount of resources that we invest on putting together that deck to be discussed in a 30, 45, or a 90 or 60-minute meeting that is mostly focused in the past. So we are constantly looking back. And I know, not only because I've worked with you, but learning throughout my career, that this is not the best that we can do out of that data, out of that analysis. So in your opinion, how can we use data to not only, of course, look back and see and look at the performance and see what we learned, but also to use this as predictability of the future for retention, for acquisition? How do you see that?
Yes, the way that I've seen it, and it sort of links with something we're discussing before as well, is when you have people that are very business oriented, but maybe do not have a lot of technical expertise or technical training. What I've seen is that they typically limit their analysis to very, how do you call it, simple forms of doing it. Let's just say it like that. Like, for example, a pivot table. A pivot table is meant to summarize, not to predict. And so if you want to predict, you have to use predictive algorithms, which are not necessarily too hard to do, but that's one of the main differences that you see. And what a predictive algorithm does is, yes, it looks into the past, but gives you a value projecting into the future. And also, you have to not only look at one number, you have to look at patterns of behavior as well. Like, I'm going to use an example that we did at Uber. I remember this well. Of course, I'm not going to use real numbers, but the behavior was actually real. For example, you hired me for acquisition. And I remember back when I got in, we had amongst many metrics, but sort of like the two main ones that I remember were you have to bring in X amount of users. Let's just say 100,000, and you have X amount of budget to do it. And there were not many other guardrails besides those. And when you kind of think into the future, it's okay. What are new users for? New users are supposed to be present money or future money. That's what they are in terms of financial gains for the company. Of course, they're people, but in terms of financial gain for the company, they represent money now or represent money later. And so what you actually want to understand is how to buy future money. And in order to buy future money, you have to buy users who will be profitable in the long run. So if you look into the past to see how users were acquired, and then look at a picture in the present and realize, okay, people who were acquired this way were profitable today, or if there is a pattern in doing that, then you can say, oh, I should acquire this way, so in the future I get X amount of results. And for example, we discovered that, and also attaching again to the qualitative aspect, if a user comes in, or if you need to give a user a discount so that they come into the platform and buy, odds are they're going to keep using discounts into the future. And this user not only will never become profitable. If the user costs you $10, if you look 5 months into the future, it's going to be now not at -10 but at -15, because since people use snapshots and look into the past and not what they want in the future, like you just mentioned, they just go, oh, okay, this amount of users did not come back, let's just give them another discount, without realizing that maybe they had been giving discounts in the past as well. So that's sort of a way of thinking that you see a lot of in boardrooms, or that I've seen a lot in boardrooms. So you have to know into the future what you want to project, what's been happening into the past, and then let data, let you project that into the future, into a strategy. And also that you have to tie it with other data. And it does not have to be data from the internet. I am a university professor as well, and I encourage my students, yes, we're from Mexico. INEGI is where you go and look for Mexico level stats, populations, income, etc. Do look there, but what I think works better, get out of your house, go down to the street and ask 30 people if after they paid rent and whatnot, they still have money left, to buy anything for themselves, just disposable income. You'll realize that the population that can actually buy food delivery, which is a luxury product, is a lot smaller than if you looked at INEGI and say, oh, total addressable market, 30 million. It's maybe 7, maybe. And so now that you have the qualitative data and that you look that people with discounts do not make you money, what's it? It's just that people who do have money, they don't care about anything, unless, of course, you give them really bad experience and they will continue to buy. And you have to cater your product as a luxury product for people who will actually spend the money to actually give you money as well. I remember back then, interest rates in Mexico were 11%. I'm like, if we're not doing 11%, then why do it at all,
Absolutely. This is gold to start with. And I'm having this conversation with one of my current clients about acquisition, right? So he is structuring a customer experience department. And we were having the conversation about the quality of the clients that the sales team is bringing in. Because not all acquisition is equal. So understanding the quality of the clients and what is the behavior that you were driving. And of course, by listening to you, it kind of threw me back to my time at Uber Eats, where we used to have a lot of promotion to acquire new clients, but we were kind of shaping the behavior right up front. And we
Yes,
were educating those clients that in order to be in the platform, we would feed them with discounts. And this is something that was under our control. So you may not acquire as many clients as you would like to, but factoring the quality of those clients is right important. It's equally or even more important, I would say, because if you have a base of client, database of clients that is needs to be fed with discounts, then you were kind of burning money to keep them there. While
yes,
if you have fewer clients that are way more loyal because of the service, because of the experience, because of the
correct,
solutions, then you have to invest a lot less money, but you're going to have a lot more kind of a longer term database.
correct.
It's it's so important.
And you have to know your industry as well, as you of course know because you worked on the industry for some time. The food delivery industry is it's an industry with somewhat tight margins. So big discounts or even medium discounts typically mean red numbers. For example, there's a lot of people who use discounts and they still are above zero or even within the ROI that they want. And that drives volume, that's fine. I have nothing against discounts. You just have to make sure that those discounts work in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do remember when I was at Uber Eats, and one of the projects that I'm very proud of is the initiative that we put in place for women in the platform, not only for the women-owned restaurants, but for the consumers, the female consumers, kind of targeting them in order to address their needs instead of using overall or average communication. By the time that we targeted them, we saw the results coming in. And why? Because we were speaking to them directly and addressing their needs. So that's the other thing that people can do with data. And I use this example quite often, that is not kind of a don't run the business by the average.
Yeah,
Understanding your audience, understanding your industry, and finding your niche. I see many companies kind of looking back to the back mirror just to see, oh, what our competitors are doing. So how are we going to catch up? Do you actually need? Isn't there kind of a room for you to be authentic and unique in your industry and kind of a standout based on this? Do you actually need to go after your competitors? That's another, but this is a topic for.
no, but I completely agree. You have to understand, what your competitors are doing. I mean, I think the rearview mirror is sort of a good analogy because sure, I mean, you need to know where other cars are so you don't crash, but you need to be putting attention on the road ahead of you. So I think that's a good analogy actually. But yeah, like you have to understand that maybe your competitors or who you think your competitors are do not cater to the same people as you do.
Yeah.
Like maybe
If you
okay,
are
but
looking.
it's almost the exact same product, yes. But you have because of luck, because of strategy, because you came in first, for whatever reason, you have like the income wise. Of course, I'm not gonna judge people on anything else. Income wise, you already have the Ace and A plus. Exploit it. Of course,
Yes,
take advantage of it.
absolutely.
Let the other
Yeah,
people struggle for the dime or whatever. Don't do that yourself.
absolutely. If you are looking at the rear mirror, you're not looking ahead. Do
Exactly.
you need to look at the rear mirror? For sure, but
But
it's not always.
every,
If you were constantly looking at the rear mirror, then you do not know what is in front of you.
yes, exactly. Like you have to every once in a while, you have to check, but for the most part, you have to be looking ahead. And also something that you said also about acquisition and retention that I really like a lot. And I like to say this to my, how do you call it, to my customers as well as my students. Of course, there's not necessarily, but a retention team can help a lot. The best retention is to acquire well in the first place.
Oh, totally. If you acquire the right client, the right customer, and you educate and you shape the behavior you want them to have, then they will bring other clients like them.
Yes. Like
Right?
to put numbers to it, like let's just say that your job as acquisition is bring users who have, I'm just going to throw numbers out there, some 40-45% chance or above of staying in the platform. And then the retention team, their job is to give them the last little push. If you bring people who are unlikely to stay, these people in engagement teams, they're not magicians. They do not perform miracles. They will not be able to do it. And it's not because they are bad at their job. It's because you gave them an impossible task. So if you give them people who are on the line, and then they give them a last little push, your engagement team will likely to be very successful. And if not, you will probably have a lot of rotation because you gave them KPIs that are just unachievable. You just have a rotation of people who are probably very talented, but it's just you that set the wrong goals.
Absolutely. We have one more question here from Chrissy that I want to bring on online. So how do we isolate which lever is influencing customer behavior before making conclusions about casuality? In your food delivery example, what if the churn was more affected by a different metric? Example, order was incorrect. So it may not have been as much due to the delivery time. Are there ways to analyze the data to feel more confident about the casuality?
Yes.
Love the question, Christy. Loved it. And you raised the question to the right person.
And I love the question. It's called a multivariate analysis. And the way you do multivariate analysis is that you have, in the technical sense, a database with a bunch of orders or users or whatever it is that you want to understand. And you have a lot of characteristics about that user or that order. And then you have a column that it's yes or no, ROI positive or negative, churn, no churn, etc., where you have actually what you're trying to measure. And if you know which algorithms to use, I like to use 3 algorithms, and I'll show you a brief example in a minute. If you put all of this data into the algorithm, and then the algorithm will go through the data and actually tell you in order of importance which is the most important variable, which threshold, at which threshold does behavior change, and then the probability of future behavior given that threshold. So I'm going to share my screen real quick again. Look, this is, for example, this is how the result looks. But this was a table with millions of users. Of course, this is invented data. I cannot have company data in public. This is invented data, but with the same, same behavior. You have many users, some churned, some didn't, and there were a lot of variables, if they were male or female, their age, where they lived, etc., etc. And within those variables, I had if they had a discount and how big that discount was. And so what the algorithm does by itself is it looks through all the variables and it tells you, Joel, this is the most important variable to be able to predict if the user will be profitable or not. See, sorry that it's in Spanish. User will be profitable. No, the user will not be profitable. Out of the entire database, some 40% were profitable, some 60% were not. However, if you look into the percentage discount and users who their order had a discount 8% or higher within the first order, you can see that only 16% would be profitable in the future, 80% would not. However, users with very little discount, you can see that most of them will be profitable and very little of them or very few of them will not. So I hope that answered the question. If not, you can write me or whatever. But what you do is throw all the variables that you think might affect, and then the data, the algorithm will tell you actually which ones are predictive of certain behavior and which ones are not.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joel. I think this is a good segue for another question I have for you, because not everybody truly understands the power of machine learning. They may not be technical or they're just going with the flow. I think the majority of the people use this as a supporting tool, which is just a tip of the iceberg. So using a machine learning as a supporting tool is a waste of resources. So what kind of advice would you give to executives that are not technical and do not fully understand the power of machine learning? So how can they start that journey and take the best advantage of machine learning for their business?
For me, it was almost 100% luck. I was doing my MBA. That class looked fun. I took it, and this is what I do for a living now. But if you are a leader, if you're not gonna, do it yourself, and because maybe you're a leader and you have analysts that report to you, I would at least advise to go to, YouTube or whatever, and understand what these algorithms do and when they can be used or when they cannot. Not only just so you can direct better, but when the more knowledge you have, and this is even true, like if you learn another language, your brain makes connections. You think differently. And when you understand how algorithms technically work, you will be better equipped to, how do you call it, to analyze. Why? Because you realize that you need to have something to analyze or something that you want to understand before you go for it, which is something that we discussed before. If you are a technical person, you understand that without a dependent variable, there's no analysis. So that's the technical language. But if you are familiar with it, you understand, okay, I need something to predict before I analyze whatever I think may predict it. And also you realize something as well. And I think that's probably, if I were to give you my biggest secret, and I'm going to do it right now, is that a lot of people just think whenever you have a numerical variable, let's say sales, whether it's in units or in dollars, you think pivot table, or maybe you do a regression, because you think that that's the only way because that variable is a number. However, there's a trick that I like to use. If, for example, you need to understand, maybe you don't need to project an exact sales number, but maybe you need to understand what happens in a given month where you typically sell above average. You could take that sales variable, tag it as above or below average. Now you have a binary variable, and you can use a tree algorithm that does everything I said in the other example, that will give you which variables typically yield a above average sales or not, etc. And that is way easier to read, because it's not only about being accurate, it's about being actionable. You can have a very good regression. You have 20 variables, and every single one of them will have a coefficient. And reading that and making a decision based on that, it's extremely hard. If it's going to be productized, that's fine. But if you're going to go to a meeting and show a coefficient, it's just not going to do the trick. But if you have an algorithm that says, hey, these are the two most important variables, and this is the value that you need to be looking for, that's very, very actionable information.
I love it. And I'm going to put you on the spotlight because you mentioned about going on YouTube and kind of watching a few videos. Maybe you can record a video explaining this and share with the audience. What a great opportunity, because I'm pretty sure that this is not a question from just one person, but for many. Not everybody kind of have the technical understand as you do, and sometimes just is afraid of kind of, as we were discussing before going live, of having an opinion or making an assumption just because they think they do not know enough. So maybe you start from the basics, educating them with a video from you would be a great step.
Yes,
so
I have a lot of technical business posts on my LinkedIn, so you can start there. But yeah, it's a very good idea. I think I might take you on your word for it.
yes.
And also
And
research decision trees, because a lot of people don't use them because they're less powerful, but they are the only machine learning algorithm that I know that is not a black box. And when you actually look inside of it to understand why the algorithm makes the decision it does, it's very, very insightful.
amazing. So you won't believe me, but we are approaching the end. Time just flew by, and it was such an amazing conversation and very insightful and valuable conversation. I want to thank our audience for being so active with comments and questions. But now, Joel, so what is the best way to get in contact with you? What are the main projects that you have in flight? So let's share this with the audience so they can learn and get more from you moving forward.
Yes, if you want to reach me directly, my email is Joel at menendezanalytics.com. And I can, if you have any inquiries about what it is that I do or how I can help you, that's a great way to start. I also have my own website, which is menendezanalytics.com. And in terms of social media, my handle is very weird, so I'm going to write it. If in case you want to how do you call it? Or I don't know if I can send you via WhatsApp and you can put it later, because I think it's
Yes,
asking me
absolutely.
that.
I'm gonna post your handles here.
And also on LinkedIn, which is where I post the most technical professional stuff. You can just look for me, Joel Menéndez Ramirez. I don't know if there's other Joel Menéndez, which can get confused, but Joel Menéndez Ramirez, I'm 99% sure that I'm the only one on LinkedIn. And you can see there's a picture of me doing like this. yeah, that's me. Just in case you were wondering.
Fantastic. Joel,
Wait,
thank you so much for taking the time, for being here, for keep educating me and now my audience as well. I am pretty sure that we all learned a lot from you today. And it's always good to have inspiring leaders like you in the show. So thank you very much for taking the time. And to you all, stay tuned. Next week, I'll be back. See you there.
thank you.